The morning sky over Brandenburg, Germany erupted in chaos as Captain Nathaniel Vossler pushed his North American P-51 Mustang into a near-vertical climb, his engine screaming against the thin air at 28,000 feet. It was March 22, 1944, and the young pilot from Kalispell, Montana, was about to commit an act of calculated disobedience that would rewrite the rulebook for long-range fighter escorts. Below him, a formation of 137 Boeing B-17 Flying Fortresses lumbered toward their target, while above, 23 Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters dove like hawks toward the vulnerable bombers. The radio crackled with urgent commands from his squadron leader ordering all escorts to maintain defensive formation, but Vossler's gloved hand was already pushing his throttle to war emergency power. The metallic taste of oxygen filled his mouth as he pulled negative G-forces, his vision tunneling as blood rushed from his brain. Through his canopy, he could see the white contrails of the diving German fighters, their yellow nose markings clearly visible in the crystalline March air. No one in the 352nd Fighter Group knew that one man's refusal to follow protocol that morning would demonstrate to the Luftwaffe that American engineering had created something extraordinary, something that would hunt their elite pilots across the entire breadth of Nazi Germany and bring them face to face with their own mortality. Nathaniel Vossler had grown up in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, the son of a Norwegian immigrant blacksmith who had taught him that tools were only as good as the man who wielded them. Born in 1922 in the small logging town of Kalispell, Montana, young Nathaniel spent his childhood watching his father, Gunnar, hammer raw iron into horseshoes, farm implements, and intricate metalwork that seemed to flow like water under his skilled hands. The boy learned early that precision and patience could transform the most stubborn materials into instruments of beauty and purpose. When he was 14 years old, Nathaniel witnessed a barnstorming pilot perform aerobatics over Flathead Lake in a bright yellow Curtiss Jenny, and something crystallized in his mind about the marriage of mechanical perfection and human skill. He spent the next 4 years working in his father's forge after school, saving every penny for flying lessons at the small airstrip outside town. By the time he graduated high school in 1940, Nathaniel could perform barrel rolls, loops, and Immelman turns with the confidence of a pilot who understood that aircraft were simply another kind of tool, requiring the same respect and intuitive understanding that his father brought to working iron. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, 20-year-old Nathaniel walked into the Army Air Force's recruiting office in Great Falls and told the sergeant he wanted to fly fighters. The recruiter looked at this lean, quiet young man with calloused hands and penetrating gray eyes, and sensed something beyond the typical farm boy eagerness for adventure. During basic flight training at Randolph Field in Texas, Nathaniel's instructors noted his unusual ability to sense his aircraft's performance envelope, pushing right to the edge of a stall or structural limit without ever crossing the line. He graduated primary training third in his class, advanced training second, and was selected for single-engine fighter assignment at Luke Field in Arizona. His fellow cadets respected his methodical approach to flying, but some wondered if the soft-spoken Montanan possessed the aggressive instincts necessary for air-to-air combat. They had no way of knowing that beneath Nathaniel's careful exterior lay the same fierce determination that had driven his grandfather to cross an ocean with nothing but a toolkit and an unshakable belief that skilled hands could shape any destiny. The year 1943 had been a brutal education for American bomber crews attempting to penetrate the industrial heart of Nazi Germany. The 8th Air Force was losing aircraft and aircrew at rates that threatened to cripple the entire strategic bombing campaign before it could achieve decisive results. During the infamous Schweinfurt raids of October 14, 1943, 60 B-17 bombers failed to return home. taking with them 600 trained aircrew members whose replacement would require months of training that the Allies could not afford. The fundamental problem was range. Existing American fighter escorts like the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt and the Lockheed P-38 Lightning possessed neither the fuel capacity nor the aerodynamic efficiency to accompany bomber formations deep into German airspace, leaving the flying fortresses vulnerable to coordinated attacks from Luftwaffe interceptors during the most dangerous portions of their missions. German fighter tactics had evolved to exploit this weakness, with experienced pilots like Hauptmann Georg Peter Eder and Major Wilhelm Batz developing sophisticated group attack methods that could overwhelm bomber defensive formations within minutes. The Messerschmitt Bf 109, particularly the latest Gustav variant, remained a formidable opponent capable of climbing to 30,000 feet and diving at speeds approaching 400 miles per hour. German pilots understood that they needed only to survive the initial defensive fire from bomber gunners to position themselves for killing shots against engines, fuel tanks, and cockpits. Luftwaffe training emphasized patience, teamwork, and precise gunnery, creating a generation of pilots who approached combat with scientific methodology rather than reckless aggression. The mathematics of aerial warfare seemed to favor the defenders, who could choose the time and place of engagement while operating over familiar territory with numerous emergency landing fields available. For American bomber crews, each mission deeper than 300 miles into German territory became a calculated gamble with death, as they flew through increasingly effective flak defenses to reach targets that were often obscured by weather or defended by fighters positioned at optimal altitude and attacking from the direction of the sun. The strategic situation demanded a solution that could escort bombers to Berlin and back, maintaining air superiority throughout a round trip of nearly 1,500 miles, while carrying sufficient ammunition for multiple engagements against experienced enemy pilots flying aircraft specifically designed for home defense. By early 1944, the North American P-51 Mustang had begun arriving at 8th Air Force bases across England, bringing with it the promise of extended range and superior performance that bomber crews desperately needed. The aircraft represented a remarkable fusion of British aerodynamic knowledge and American manufacturing capability, powered by the legendary Rolls-Royce Merlin engine that had proven itself in the Supermarine Spitfire during the Battle of Britain. With its laminar flow-wing design and sophisticated cooling system, the Mustang could cruise at 25,000 feet while consuming fuel at rates that allowed escort missions deep into Central Europe. Captain Nathaniel Vossler first laid eyes on his assigned P-51 at Bodney Airfield in Norfolk, England on February 8, 1944, and spent the next 6 weeks learning the aircraft's capabilities through a combination of formal transition training and unauthorized experimentation that pushed both pilot and machine to their absolute limits. The Mustang responded to control inputs with a precision that reminded him of his father's finest tools, requiring delicate touch rather than brute force to achieve maximum performance. During high-altitude training flights over the North Sea, Nathaniel discovered that his aircraft could maintain level flight at altitudes where German fighters struggled to operate effectively, and that its powerful Merlin engine could generate enough thrust to climb vertically for thousands of feet when properly managed. His crew chief, Technical Sergeant Dmitry Kozlowski from Detroit, Michigan, noted that Captain Vossler spent more time studying technical manuals and discussing engine management than any pilot he had ever worked with, often requesting modifications to fuel flow systems and propeller settings that extracted additional performance from equipment that other pilots considered already optimized. The relationship between pilot and aircraft became so intimate that Kozlowski claimed he could predict Vossler's requests for maintenance simply by observing how the engine sounded during post-flight run-up procedures. As the 352nd Fighter Group prepared for their first long-range escort mission to Berlin, squadron intelligence officers briefed pilots on the latest German fighter tactics and emphasized the critical importance of maintaining formation discipline to provide mutual support against coordinated enemy attacks. The standing orders were explicit. Escort fighters would remain in close proximity to bomber formations at all times, engaging enemy aircraft only when absolutely necessary to protect the primary mission. No pilot was authorized to pursue individual targets or engage in extended combat that might separate him from the bombers under his protection. March 22, 1944 dawned cold and clear across eastern England, with visibility extending to the horizon and winds favorable for the deepest penetration mission yet attempted by 8th Air Force heavy bombers. The target was a complex of aircraft manufacturing plants near Berlin, defended by some of the most experienced fighter units in the Luftwaffe, and protected by concentric rings of anti-aircraft artillery that had been refined through years of defending the Nazi capital. Captain Vossler completed his pre-flight inspection of Mountain Thunder, his P-51, named after the summer storms that swept across his Montana homeland, checking every control surface, fuel line, and ammunition feed with the methodical attention his father had taught him to bring to any precision work. The mission briefing had been sobering. Intelligence estimated that more than 200 German fighters would attempt to intercept the bomber stream, including units equipped with the latest Focke-Wulf FW-190 models armed with heavy cannons capable of destroying a B-17 with a single well-placed burst. At 0830 hours, 137 Flying Fortresses lifted off from bases across East Anglia, forming up over the English Channel before turning southeast toward their distant target. Vossler's squadron, consisting of 16 P-51 Mustangs, would join the bomber stream over Belgium and provide high cover during the most dangerous portion of the penetration. As they crossed the channel at 22,000 feet, Vossler could see the massive bomber formation stretched across miles of sky like a steel migration, each aircraft carrying 10 young Americans toward targets they might never reach. The radio chattered with position reports, weather updates, and the constant background noise of 600 engines laboring to carry their burden across enemy territory. As they approached the German border, ground-based radar began tracking the formation, and Luftwaffe fighter units across northern Europe received scramble orders that would put experienced pilots in the air within minutes. Intelligence intercepts suggested that the Germans had developed new tactics specifically designed to overwhelm escort fighters through coordinated attacks from multiple directions, forcing American pilots to choose between protecting bombers and defending themselves. The morning sun climbed higher as the formation penetrated deeper into German airspace, and Vossler could feel the familiar pre-combat tension building in his chest as his hands automatically checked weapon switches, fuel management, and engine parameters one final time. At precisely 11:47 hours, radar operators at Luftwaffe headquarters near Berlin confirmed that a massive American formation was approaching from the northwest, estimated at over 100 heavy bombers escorted by approximately 60 fighter aircraft. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, commanding Jagdgeschwader 7, ordered his most experienced pilots to execute Sturmfalke, Aitu, a new tactical doctrine that concentrated overwhelming force against a single section of the bomber formation, accepting heavy losses among attacking fighters in exchange for devastating the primary target. 23 Messerschmitt Bf-109 aircraft from Jagdgeschwader 7 and Jagdgeschwader 54 climbed to 35,000 feet, positioning themselves between the sun and the approaching Americans while additional fighter units maneuvered to attack from multiple vectors simultaneously. The German pilots were seasoned veterans averaging over 300 combat hours each, led by men like Hauptmann Anton Haeckel and Oberfeldwebel Gerhard Barkhorn, whose combined kill totals exceeded 150 Allied aircraft. Their aircraft had been modified with additional armor around the cockpit and engine, plus heavy-caliber cannons capable of destroying bombers with brief firing passes that minimized exposure to defensive fire. At 28,000 feet, Captain Vossler scanned the sky methodically, using techniques his father had taught him for detecting subtle changes in familiar patterns, when he spotted the faint glint of sunlight reflecting off canopies high above the bomber formation. His radio call to squadron leader, Major Frederick Christensen, was immediate and precise. Bandits at 2 o'clock high, approximately 30,000 feet, estimate 20-plus aircraft preparing to attack. Christensen's response followed standard doctrine exactly. Maintain position. All aircraft do not break formation. But Vossler's experienced eye could read the German tactical setup with crystalline clarity. The enemy fighters were positioning for a coordinated diving attack that would strike the bomber formation with concentrated firepower from an optimal angle, and the escort fighters were too low and too far forward to intercept effectively. Mathematical calculations raced through his mind as he computed closing speeds, dive angles, and the time required for his Mustang to climb to an intercepting position. The numbers painted a stark picture. Following orders would result in catastrophic bomber losses, while breaking formation offered the possibility of disrupting the German attack at the cost of violating direct instructions from his commanding officer. In that crystalline moment at 28,000 feet above Brandenburg, Germany, Captain Nathaniel Vossler made a decision that would echo through the annals of aerial warfare for decades to come. His gloved hand pushed the throttle to war emergency power as he banked Mountain Thunder into a steep climb, pulling 4 G-forces that pressed him deep into his seat, while his Merlin engine screamed toward its operational redline. The radio exploded with angry transmissions from Major Christensen, ordering him to resume position. But Vossler had already switched to the emergency frequency and was transmitting his intentions to the bomber formation. "Big friends, this is Mountain Thunder. I have multiple bandits diving on your position from 2 o'clock high. I am climbing to intercept." The response from the lead B-17 was immediate. "Roger, Mountain Thunder. We see them coming. Give 'em hell." As his Mustang clawed skyward at maximum climb rate, Vossler could see the German fighters beginning their attack dive, their aircraft growing larger in his gun sight as the geometry of interception became clear. His airspeed bled off rapidly as he traded velocity for altitude, and for a terrifying moment it seemed impossible that he would reach firing position before the enemy fighters completed their attack run. The Messerschmitt formation, led by Hauptmann Anton Hackel, had committed to their diving attack and could not maneuver defensively without abandoning their carefully planned assault on the bombers. Vossler's tactical gamble depended on precise timing and the superior climbing performance of his aircraft. But success would require him to engage 23 experienced German pilots simultaneously, while his squadron mates remained miles below, bound by orders to maintain defensive formation. At 32,000 feet, with his engine temperature approaching critical limits and his airspeed indicator showing 190 miles per hour in a near-vertical climb, Vossler rolled inverted and dove directly into the center of the German formation, his 650 caliber machine guns already tracking the lead Messerschmitt. The surprise was complete. Hackel's pilots had never encountered an American fighter at their altitude, and their tactical doctrine included no provisions for defending against a single aircraft attacking from above during their own attack dive. Vossler's first burst struck the lead Bf-109 in the engine compartment, and white glycol coolant streamed from the damaged aircraft as Hackel fought to maintain control while his wingman attempted to maneuver for a defensive shot. The aerial ballet that followed would be studied at fighter pilot schools for generations as a masterpiece of individual initiative overcoming superior numbers through superior positioning and aircraft performance. Vossler's Mustang possessed a crucial advantage in the thin air above 30,000 feet, where the Merlin engine's sophisticated supercharging system maintained power output, while the German Daimler-Benz engines began losing effectiveness. As the Messerschmitt formation scattered to avoid his initial attack, Vossler demonstrated the tactical flexibility that his unauthorized climb had created, using his superior altitude to dive on individual targets while maintaining energy advantage over aircraft that had committed to attacking the bomber formation below. His second kill came as Oberfeldwebel Klaus Weber attempted to resume his attack dive, presenting his aircraft's profile perfectly as Vossler rolled out of his climb and fired a 3-second burst that severed the German pilot's port wing at the root. The Bf-109 tumbled end over end before exploding in a brilliant orange fireball that scattered debris across miles of sky. By this time, the surviving German pilots had abandoned their bomber attack entirely and were maneuvering desperately to engage the lone American fighter that had disrupted their carefully orchestrated assault. Major Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most experienced fighter leaders with over 200 victories, led a climbing turn that brought 4 Messerschmitts into position for a coordinated attack on Vossler's Mustang. But the Montana pilot had anticipated this reaction and was already diving away at full throttle, using his aircraft's superior high-altitude performance to maintain separation while German fighters struggled to match his speed in the thin air. The tactical situation had reversed completely. Instead of 23 German fighters attacking defenseless bombers, experienced Luftwaffe pilots found themselves pursuing a single American aircraft that seemed capable of outfighting their entire formation. Radio transmissions intercepted by Allied intelligence revealed the growing frustration among German pilots as they discovered that their standard tactics were ineffective against an opponent who refused to engage according to established doctrine. Hauptmann Hackel, his aircraft trailing coolant and oil, transmitted to his wingman, "This American fights like no pilot we have encountered. He uses his aircraft like a tool designed specifically for this altitude." The bomber formation continued unmolested toward their target while, below them, one man's calculated disobedience had transformed a potential massacre into a tactical demonstration of American engineering superiority. As the engagement continued to evolve at altitudes where few pilots had ever experienced combat, Vossler began to understand that his Mustang possessed capabilities that even its designers had not fully appreciated. The aircraft's laminar flow wing design maintained lift characteristics in thin air that allowed sustained maneuvering at altitudes where other fighters became sluggish and unpredictable. His engine management skills, honed through years of working with precision mechanical systems, enabled him to extract maximum performance from the Merlin power plant, while German pilots found their engines losing power and responsiveness above 30,000 feet. The third German aircraft fell when Lieutenant Friedrich Wachowiak, attempting to gain altitude for a deflection shot, stalled his Bf-109 in the thin air and presented a stationary target that Vossler engaged with devastating accuracy. The young German pilot, barely 19 years old and flying only his 7th combat mission, had never encountered conditions where his aircraft's performance degraded so dramatically with altitude. His Messerschmitt fell in a flat spin, its pilot unconscious from the sudden decompression that resulted when Vossler's 50 caliber rounds shattered his canopy at 34,000 feet. The psychological impact on the surviving German pilots was profound. Veterans who had dominated European skies for nearly 5 years found themselves outflown by a single American pilot in an aircraft they had dismissed as inferior to their proven Messerschmitt design. Radio intercepts revealed increasingly desperate tactical discussions as German flight leaders attempted to coordinate attacks against an opponent who seemed to anticipate their every maneuver. Obergefreiter Wilhelm Krinius, a veteran of the Russian front with 47 confirmed kills, transmitted to his squadron leader, "Herr Hauptmann, This aircraft climbs like nothing we have seen. I cannot match his rate of ascent." The realization was spreading through the German formation that they were encountering not just a skilled pilot, but an aircraft design that represented a qualitative shift in fighter performance. Hauptmann Haeckel, his damaged aircraft forcing him to break off engagement, watched from below as the lone American continued to outmaneuver his most experienced pilots and transmitted a message that would be recorded in Luftwaffe intelligence files. American fighter aircraft performance exceeds previous estimates by significant margins. Recommend immediate tactical revision for high-altitude interception. The bomber formation, now approaching their target area near Berlin, had benefited from 37 minutes of unmolested flying time, while their original nemesis became locked in combat with a single escort fighter operating at altitudes that made effective bombing attacks nearly impossible. Colonel James Stewart, commanding the lead bomber group, watched through his bombardier's position as German fighters continued their futile attempts to climb high enough to engage the American Mustang that had single-handedly disrupted their attack. The irony was not lost on the experienced bomber pilot. One man's disobedience had achieved what an entire squadron following orders could not have accomplished. Below them, the industrial targets of Nazi Germany spread across the landscape like a mechanical cancer, while above them, the contrails of aerial combat created geometric patterns against the deep blue sky that marked each maneuver in the deadly dance between predator and prey. As they approached the initial point for their bomb run, Stewart's radio operator received an unexpected transmission from the lone fighter still engaged high above. "Big friends, this is Mountain Thunder. Target area clear of enemy fighters. No interference anticipated for your approach." The calmness in Vossler's voice contrasted sharply with the chaos of aerial combat visible through the bomber's windows, where German fighters continued their desperate attempts to gain altitude advantage over an aircraft that seemed to mock the laws of aerodynamics that governed conventional fighter performance. Technical Sergeant Robert Kowalski, tail gunner on the lead B-17, would later write to his family, "We watched this one crazy pilot take on the whole German Air Force by himself. Every time they tried to climb up to him, he would dive down and shoot another one. It was like watching someone swat flies, except the flies were trying to kill us." The bombing run proceeded with unprecedented precision, as bombardiers had unlimited time to line up their targets without defensive maneuvering to avoid fighter attacks. Anti-aircraft fire remained heavy and accurate, but the absence of coordinated fighter attacks allowed bomber formations to maintain tight defensive groupings that maximized their combined firepower against ground-based threats. When the bomb bay doors closed and the formation began its long turn homeward, every aircraft remained flyable, a result that would have been impossible if the original German fighter attack had succeeded according to plan. As the bomber formation began its withdrawal toward Allied territory, Vossler faced a crucial decision that would test both his aircraft's endurance and his own tactical judgment. His fuel gauges showed sufficient reserves for the return flight, but continuing to engage superior numbers of enemy fighters carried obvious risks that might prevent him from protecting the bombers during their vulnerable egress through German airspace. The German pilots, frustrated by their inability to execute their planned attack on the bomber formation, had reorganized under Hauptmann Haeckel's leadership into a defensive screen designed to prevent the lone American fighter from interfering with additional interceptor units approaching from airfields around Berlin. Radio intercepts revealed that Oberst Steinhoff had ordered every available fighter in the Berlin defense sector to converge on the American bomber formation, creating a gauntlet of opposition that could overwhelm escort fighters through sheer numerical superiority. As Vossler assessed his tactical options, he observed that his unauthorized climb to extreme altitude had created an unexpected strategic advantage. German fighters attempting to reach his position were operating at the absolute limits of their performance envelope, while his Mustang retained sufficient power and maneuverability to maintain air superiority throughout their withdrawal route. The mathematics of aerial combat favored the defender when altitude and energy advantages were properly utilized, and Vossler's early decision to violate formation discipline had established both factors in his favor. His fourth kill occurred when Hauptmann Werner Schröer, leading a climbing attack with 3 wingmen, misjudged his aircraft's stall characteristics in the thin air and presented a perfect deflection target as his Bf-109 shuddered on the edge of controllability. Vossler's gunnery, refined through countless hours of practice on the ranges of Montana and perfected during training flights over England, placed 650 caliber rounds through the German pilot's engine compartment with surgical precision. Schröer's aircraft, its cooling system destroyed and engine seizing, fell away in a spiraling dive that carried one of Germany's most experienced fighter leaders toward the earth he had defended with such skill for over 4 years of continuous combat. The psychological impact on surviving German pilots was devastating. Veterans who had survived the Battle of Britain, the Russian campaign, and years of escort fighter combat over Western Europe found themselves systematically outfought by a single American pilot whose tactical approach defied every assumption they had developed about Allied fighter capabilities. The withdrawal route took the American formation across the industrial heart of Nazi Germany, where additional fighter units waited at airfields that had been carefully positioned to provide overlapping coverage against Allied bombing raids. As they approached the city of Hanover, Vossler's sharp eyes detected the telltale glint of sunlight on aircraft canopies as fresh German fighters climbed to intercept altitude, their pilots unaware that a lone American Mustang already controlled the high ground above their intended attack position. Major Gunther Rall, leading Jagdgeschwader 11's elite interceptor unit, had been briefed on the presence of a single American fighter operating at extreme altitude, but had dismissed intelligence reports as exaggerated combat claims that bore little relationship to tactical reality. His confidence evaporated when Vossler's Mustang dove out of the sun at 400 miles per hour, guns blazing, and destroyed his wingman's aircraft before Rall could even identify the attacking aircraft's nationality. The engagement that followed demonstrated the profound tactical advantages that superior altitude and aircraft performance could provide to a skilled pilot willing to exploit them aggressively. Vossler's 5th and 6th kills came within 90 seconds as he dove through the German formation, selected targets based on their position and vulnerability, and climbed back to altitude before defensive fire could track his rapidly moving aircraft. Lieutenant Johann Pichler, flying his first combat mission after completing advanced fighter training, watched in horrified fascination as the American pilot systematically destroyed experienced pilots who had been his instructors just weeks earlier. His radio transmission, intercepted by Allied listening posts, captured the psychological impact of witnessing superior technology and tactics in action. Mein Gott, he flies like the aircraft is part of his body. We are fighting a machine that thinks. The surviving German fighters, their tactical formation destroyed, and their confidence shattered, broke off engagement and dove toward their home airfields, leaving the bomber formation to continue its withdrawal unmolested. Major Rall, his aircraft damaged but flyable, transmitted a combat report that would reach the highest levels of Luftwaffe command within hours. American P-51 performance at altitude exceeds all previous intelligence estimates. Single aircraft destroyed experienced four-ship formation with minimal damage to attacker. Recommend immediate tactical revision and aircraft modification to counter new threat. As the bomber formation crossed into Allied-controlled airspace over Belgium, the full magnitude of Vossler's achievement became clear to both participants and observers. Intelligence officers monitoring German radio traffic had recorded unprecedented admissions of tactical inferiority from some of the Luftwaffe's most experienced pilots, while bomber crews reported the first mission to Berlin that had been completed without a single aircraft lost to fighter attack. Captain Vossler's unauthorized decision to break formation and climb to extreme altitude had not only saved hundreds of American lives, but had also demonstrated capabilities of the P-51 Mustang that would fundamentally alter the strategic balance of the air war over Europe. Technical Sergeant Dmitry Kozlowski, Vossler's crew chief, was waiting at the hard stand when Mountain Thunder touched down at Bodny Airfield after 8 hours and 47 minutes of flight time that included combat at altitudes and airspeeds that pushed both pilot and aircraft beyond their designed operational limits. His post-flight inspection revealed minimal damage despite extended combat against superior numbers. 3 bullet holes in the port wing, superficial damage to the tail assembly from defensive fire, and engine parameters that indicated the Merlin power plant had performed flawlessly throughout the mission, despite operating at war emergency power for extended periods. Kozlowski would later write in his technical diary, "Captain Vossler brought this aircraft home in better condition than most pilots return from routine training flights. He understands that machines perform best when operated by someone who respects their capabilities and limitations." The mission debrief, conducted by intelligence officers from 8th Air Force Headquarters, revealed that Vossler had engaged over 40 German fighters during the course of the mission, achieved 6 confirmed kills, and prevented a coordinated attack that could have resulted in catastrophic bomber losses. His tactical innovation of using extreme altitude to gain positional advantage over enemy formations had been developed spontaneously during combat, without reference to established doctrine or training procedures. When asked by Colonel Curtis LeMay why he had disobeyed direct orders to maintain formation, Vossler's response became part of Air Force legend. "Sir, my orders were to protect those bombers. I couldn't do that from where we were supposed to be." The ripple effects of Vossler's unauthorized combat action extended far beyond the immediate tactical success of the Berlin mission. Within 72 hours, Luftwaffe technical intelligence had issued urgent bulletins to all fighter units warning of dramatically improved American fighter performance at high altitude, and German aircraft designers began emergency modifications to improve the high-altitude capabilities of their interceptor aircraft. The psychological impact on German pilots was equally profound, as veterans who had considered themselves masters of European skies discovered that American engineering had produced an aircraft capable of outfighting their most advanced designs in the hands of a properly trained pilot. Hauptmann Anton Haeckel, whose damaged Bf-109 had forced him to land at an emergency airfield near Magdeburg, submitted a detailed combat report that would be studied at Luftwaffe headquarters for months. The American P-51 possesses performance characteristics that our intelligence services have consistently underestimated. At altitude exceeding 9,000 meters, this aircraft maintains power and maneuverability that render our standard tactical approaches ineffective. German fighter training programs immediately began incorporating new procedures designed to counter high-altitude attacks from American escort fighters, while aircraft manufacturers received urgent contracts to develop improved supercharging systems for existing fighter designs. The strategic implications were clear. If American fighters could establish air superiority at any altitude over German territory, the Third Reich's ability to defend its industrial base had been compromised beyond repair. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, reviewing combat reports from multiple fighter units that had engaged American escorts during the Berlin raid, reached a conclusion that he transmitted directly to Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring. American fighter escort capability has achieved qualitative superiority that negates our numerical advantages. Current German fighter aircraft are insufficient to maintain homeland defense against sustained Allied bombing operations. The admission represented a fundamental shift in German strategic thinking about air defense, as military leaders acknowledged that technological innovation had trumped tactical experience and numerical superiority in determining the outcome of aerial combat. Within the American military establishment, Vossler's achievement generated intense interest among tacticians and aircraft designers who recognized the broader implications of his combat success. Colonel Don Blakesley, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, immediately implemented new training procedures that emphasized high-altitude combat techniques and engine management skills that would allow P-51 pilots to exploit their aircraft's superior performance characteristics against German opposition. The North American Aviation Corporation received detailed technical reports describing how their aircraft had performed during extended combat at extreme altitude, information that would influence the design of future fighter aircraft for the remainder of the war. Test pilots at Wright Field in Ohio began systematic evaluation of P-51 performance at altitudes exceeding 35,000 feet, discovering that the aircraft possessed capabilities that had never been fully explored during initial development and testing. Captain Charles Yeager, already recognized as an exceptional test pilot, would later write, "Vossler proved that the Mustang was built for fighting in air so thin that most pilots had never imagined combat was possible. He showed us that our aircraft could do things we had never dreamed of trying." The tactical lessons from Vossler's unauthorized engagement were incorporated into fighter pilot training programs throughout the Allied air forces, with particular emphasis on the importance of altitude advantage and energy management in aerial combat. Young pilots arriving at operational squadrons learned that their aircraft possessed performance capabilities far exceeding anything their enemies could match, provided they possessed the skill and courage to exploit those advantages effectively. The psychological transformation was as important as the tactical improvements. American pilots began approaching combat with confidence born of technological superiority, rather than relying purely on individual skill and courage to overcome enemy advantages. Major General Jimmy Doolittle, commanding 8th Air Force Fighter Operations, issued new tactical directives that encouraged aggressive pursuit of enemy aircraft at extreme altitude, explicitly authorizing squadron leaders to break formation when tactical opportunities warranted maximum exploitation of aircraft performance advantages. The German response to Vossler's demonstration of American fighter superiority revealed the profound strategic implications of technological advancement in aerial warfare. Within 1 week of the Berlin raid, Focke-Wulf and Messerschmitt design teams had received emergency authorizations to develop improved high-altitude fighter variants, but German industrial capacity was already stretched beyond sustainable limits by competing demands for advanced weapons systems. The best German engineers understood that catching up with American aircraft performance would require fundamental redesign of engines, airframes, and combat systems that could not be accomplished within the time frame that military necessity demanded. Professor Kurt Tank, chief designer for Focke-Wulf, submitted a technical assessment that reached the highest levels of Nazi leadership. American aircraft development has achieved integration of engine and airframe performance that our current industrial capacity cannot duplicate. The P-51 represents technological advancement beyond our ability to counter with existing resources. The admission carried implications far beyond tactical aviation, as German military planners recognized that American industrial capacity was producing weapon systems that German science and engineering could not match despite years of wartime development. Luftwaffe training programs began emphasizing defensive tactics designed to avoid engagement with American fighters at high altitude, effectively conceding control of European skies above 25,000 feet to Allied air forces. German pilots learned to identify P-51 aircraft by their distinctive silhouette and engine sound, with strict instructions to avoid combat unless tactical conditions overwhelmingly favored the defender. The psychological impact on German aircrews was devastating, as men who had dominated European skies for years found themselves ordered to retreat from individual American fighters operating in small formations. Obergefreiter Wilhelm Krinius, the veteran Russian front pilot who had attempted to engage Vossler during the Berlin mission, wrote in his personal diary, "We have been fighting the wrong war. While we perfected tactics and courage, the Americans built machines that make our tactics irrelevant and our courage insufficient." The strategic balance of the air war had shifted decisively, and everyone on both sides understood that technological superiority had proven more decisive than tactical experience or individual heroism in determining the outcome of aerial combat. Captain Nathaniel Vossler returned to combat operations without fanfare, flying escort missions deep into German territory while his unauthorized tactics spread throughout American fighter squadrons as standard operating procedure for engaging enemy aircraft at extreme altitude. His squadron mates noted that he approached each mission with the same methodical preparation that had characterized his initial unauthorized climb, studying weather patterns, fuel consumption rates, and German fighter deployment patterns with scientific precision. The reputation of American escort fighters grew throughout the spring of 1944, as German interceptor units discovered that aggressive pursuit of bomber formations inevitably resulted in devastating losses to P-51 aircraft operating at altitudes where German fighters could barely maintain level flight. By May, Luftwaffe intelligence estimated that American fighter pilots had achieved a kill ratio exceeding 5-to-1 against German interceptors during escort missions, a reversal of previous combat ratios that reflected the decisive advantage of superior aircraft performance when properly exploited. Vossler's final confirmed kill came during a mission to Munich on May 24, 1944, when he encountered Hauptmann Hans Philipp leading a desperate attempt to attack B-17 bombers with obsolete Bf-109 aircraft that had been relegated to training units. The engagement lasted less than 3 minutes, as Vossler's superior altitude and aircraft performance allowed him to dictate the terms of combat, while German pilots struggled to maintain formation in thin air that pushed their engines beyond effective operating parameters. Philipp, one of Germany's most experienced fighter leaders, was shot down while attempting to climb to attack position, his aircraft falling in a flat spin that carried 206 confirmed victories toward the Earth he had defended with such skill throughout 4 years of continuous combat. The loss symbolized the broader transformation of aerial warfare, as individual heroism and tactical experience proved insufficient to overcome technological advantages that rendered traditional combat techniques obsolete. Radio intercepts revealed that German fighter units were reporting mechanical failures and pilot fatigue at rates that reflected the impossible demands of attempting to fight aircraft whose performance exceeded their own capabilities by margins that made effective combat nearly impossible. The final months of 1944 saw German fighter resistance collapse as experienced pilots were lost faster than training programs could replace them, while surviving veterans struggled to operate obsolete aircraft against American fighters whose technological superiority made traditional tactics suicidal. Captain Vossler completed his combat tour in September, having flown 87 missions and achieved 14 confirmed kills while pioneering tactical innovations that had been adopted by every American fighter squadron operating over Europe. His technique of using extreme altitude to gain tactical advantage had become standard doctrine, taught to new pilots as fundamental principles of aerial combat rather than experimental procedures developed through individual initiative. Technical Sergeant Kozlowski, who had maintained Vossler's aircraft throughout his combat tour, noted that Mountain Thunder had achieved a mechanical reliability record that exceeded factory specifications, despite operating under extreme conditions that would have destroyed lesser aircraft. The Merlin engine, originally designed for sea-level operations in British fighters, had proven capable of sustained high-altitude performance that allowed American pilots to exploit tactical advantages their enemies could not match with existing technology. When Vossler departed for assignment as an instructor pilot at the Fighter Training School in Nevada, his replacement inherited an aircraft that had proven itself capable of outfighting anything the German aircraft industry could produce, flown by a pilot who understood that technological superiority required tactical innovation to achieve maximum effectiveness. His final mission report contained observations that would influence American fighter development for years to come. The P-51 represents the first fighter aircraft designed to exploit the full performance envelope available at extreme altitude. Pilots trained to operate this aircraft at maximum capability possess tactical advantages that render enemy opposition ineffective, regardless of numerical superiority or pilot experience. The transformation was complete. American engineering had produced weapon systems that European aviation science could not match, while American pilots had learned to exploit those advantages with tactical sophistication that made traditional aerial combat doctrine obsolete. Captain Nathaniel Vossler returned to Kalispell, Montana in October 1944, carrying with him the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and the knowledge that his calculated disobedience over Brandenburg had demonstrated American technological superiority to enemies who had considered themselves masters of aerial warfare. He married Sarah Elizabeth Hendricks, a nurse from Great Falls who had waited through 2 years of combat operations, and used his military savings to purchase a small ranch in the Flathead Valley, where he could apply the same methodical approach to agriculture that had made him such an effective combat pilot. His neighbors knew him as a quiet man who worked his land with uncommon precision, but few understood that he had personally demonstrated the decisive impact of American engineering innovation on the outcome of World War II. The P-51 Mustang became the standard American fighter aircraft for the remainder of the war, achieving air superiority over European and Pacific theaters through performance capabilities that Vossler had been the first to exploit in combat. German aircraft designers continued attempting to develop interceptors capable of matching American fighter performance, but industrial limitations and resource shortages prevented any significant improvement in Luftwaffe capabilities before the war's end. The tactical principles that Vossler had developed through unauthorized experimentation became standard doctrine for American fighter operations, emphasizing aggressive exploitation of technological advantages rather than defensive formation flying that had characterized earlier escort missions. His innovation had proven that individual initiative, when applied to superior technology and tactical understanding, could achieve strategic results that transformed the entire character of aerial warfare. Young fighter pilots arriving at European bases during the final year of the war inherited tactical advantages that German opposition could not effectively counter, allowing American bombers to operate over Nazi territory with unprecedented security and precision. The mathematical calculations that had led Vossler to break formation over Brandenburg had been proven correct by subsequent combat experience. American aircraft possessed performance capabilities that, when properly exploited, rendered German fighter opposition strategically ineffective, regardless of the courage and skill of individual enemy pilots. The post-war analysis of aerial combat statistics revealed the profound strategic impact of Vossler's tactical innovation and the broader American technological achievement that it represented. During the 6 months following the Berlin mission, American escort fighters achieved a kill ratio exceeding 8-to-1 against German interceptors, while bomber losses to fighter attack declined by 93% compared to pre-Mustang operations. The P-51 had proven itself capable of establishing and maintaining air superiority over the entire European continent, allowing strategic bombing operations to proceed with minimal interference from enemy fighters. German fighter production increased throughout 1944, but improved quantity could not compensate for technological inferiority that made effective combat nearly impossible against properly flown American aircraft. Luftwaffe veterans who survived the war consistently identified the introduction of long-range American escorts as the turning point that made German air defense untenable, regardless of pilot skill or tactical innovation. The engineering achievement that produced the Mustang represented a fundamental advance in aviation technology, combining British aerodynamic research with American manufacturing capability to create aircraft performance that exceeded anything European designers had considered possible. Captain Vossler's unauthorized decision to exploit those capabilities had demonstrated their tactical potential while establishing doctrinal principles that would influence fighter operations for decades to come. His example proved that technological superiority required tactical innovation to achieve maximum effectiveness, but that individual initiative could unlock performance capabilities that transformed strategic balance in warfare. The young man from Montana had shown that American engineering could produce tools that, in skilled hands, would prove decisive in determining the outcome of global conflict. His calculated disobedience had revealed that following orders was less important than understanding the mission, and that sometimes the greatest service to military objectives required breaking the rules that conventional thinking imposed on tactical operations. The legacy extended far beyond individual achievement. Vossler had demonstrated that American industrial capacity could produce weapon systems that enemy technology could not match, while American training could develop pilots capable of exploiting those advantages with tactical sophistication that made traditional military doctrine obsolete. In the quiet years that followed, Nathaniel Vossler never spoke publicly about his wartime service, preferring to focus on the challenges of transforming Montana rangeland into productive agricultural operation through the same methodical approach that had made him such an effective combat pilot. His neighbors respected his privacy while recognizing that their quiet friend possessed knowledge and experience that set him apart from others who had served during the war. The letters that arrived occasionally from former bomber crewmen revealed glimpses of the impact his unauthorized actions had achieved, with men who owed their lives to one pilot's willingness to break formation writing to thank the man who had saved them over German skies. Technical Sergeant Kozlowski visited the ranch in 1952, bringing photographs of Mountain Thunder that had been preserved at the Air Force Museum, and spent 3 days discussing the technical innovations they had developed together during their months of combat operations. The former crew chief observed that Vossler approached farming with the same respect for mechanical precision that had characterized his flying, using equipment maintenance and operational procedures that extracted maximum performance from tools that other farmers considered adequately functional. Their conversation revealed that the tactical principles Vossler had pioneered continued to influence military aviation, as jet fighter development incorporated lessons learned from his exploitation of altitude and energy advantages during combat operations. The Korean War had validated his tactical innovations when American pilots flying F-86 Sabre aircraft used superior high-altitude performance to establish air superiority over communist forces equipped with Russian-designed fighters whose capabilities could not match American technological advantages. His legacy lived on in the training programs that taught new generations of fighter pilots to exploit aircraft performance aggressively, rather than relying on defensive tactics that negated technological superiority through conservative application. The mathematical principles that had guided his unauthorized climb over Brandenburg remained relevant as aircraft performance continued to improve, while his example of individual initiative achieving strategic results continued to inspire military leaders who understood that technological advantages required tactical innovation to achieve maximum effectiveness. As Nathaniel Vossler aged gracefully in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, where he had learned the value of precision and patience, the world continued to benefit from the strategic transformation that his individual courage had helped to achieve. The P-51 Mustang became a symbol of American technological superiority, displayed in museums and air shows where visitors could observe the aircraft that had established Allied air supremacy over Nazi Germany through performance capabilities that enemy technology could never match. Military historians studying the strategic bombing campaign consistently identified the introduction of long-range fighter escorts as the decisive factor that enabled Allied victory in the air war over Europe, while tactical analysts continued to study Vossler's unauthorized engagement as a masterpiece of individual initiative overcoming superior numbers through technological and tactical advantages. His decision to break formation had proven that sometimes the greatest service to military objectives required violating orders that conventional wisdom considered inviolable, while his tactical innovation had demonstrated that American engineering could produce weapon systems capable of achieving strategic dominance when operated by pilots who understood their full potential. The lessons extended beyond military applications, as American industrial leaders recognized that technological innovation required operational flexibility to achieve maximum competitive advantage in global markets, where traditional approaches often proved inadequate against emerging challenges. Young Americans entering military service continued to study Vossler's example as proof that individual initiative, applied to superior technology and tactical understanding, could achieve results that transformed entire strategic situations through calculated risk-taking that conventional doctrine would have prohibited. His legacy reminded each new generation that courage without innovation was often insufficient to achieve victory, while technology without tactical creativity failed to exploit capabilities that could prove decisive in determining the outcome of competitive conflicts. The quiet rancher from Montana had shown the world that American engineering excellence, when combined with individual initiative and tactical sophistication, could overcome any opposition that relied on traditional approaches to competitive challenges. The final irony of Nathaniel Vossler's extraordinary military service lay in the fact that his greatest contribution to Allied victory came through an act of calculated disobedience that violated direct orders while achieving precisely the mission objectives those orders were designed to accomplish. His unauthorized climb to extreme altitude had saved hundreds of American lives while demonstrating technological capabilities that transformed the strategic balance of aerial warfare, proving that sometimes the most effective service to military objectives required breaking the rules that conventional thinking imposed on tactical operations. As the sun set over the Montana landscape that had shaped his character and informed his approach to life's challenges, Vossler could reflect on the satisfaction of having served his country with the same methodical precision that his father had brought to working iron, transforming raw material into tools capable of accomplishing tasks that seemed impossible to those who lacked the skill and vision to exploit their full potential. His example continued to inspire military aviators who understood that technological superiority without tactical innovation often failed to achieve decisive results, while his legacy reminded American leaders that individual initiative remained essential to exploiting the competitive advantages that superior engineering and manufacturing capability could provide in strategic competition with adversaries who relied on traditional approaches to conflict resolution. The mathematics of aerial warfare had proven that one man's courage, applied to superior technology through tactical innovation, could achieve strategic results that conventional military doctrine considered impossible, while his unauthorized decision had demonstrated that sometimes the greatest service to mission objectives required violating orders that failed to recognize the full potential of available resources. Would you have possessed the courage to break formation when duty demanded innovation over obedience? Or would you have followed orders while watching others pay the price for your compliance with rules that circumstances had rendered obsolete? Share this story of American ingenuity and individual courage so that future generations remember what happens when technological excellence meets tactical innovation in the hands of someone willing to risk everything for the mission that matters most.